Hi folks, Wayne here. Topic of today is talking about using behavior profiles like DISC to help us make more successful sales calls. And really the topic is making more successful sales calls. Every sales call is about seeking to influence the behavior of another person. And at Cooper Vision, we talk a lot about using tools like the adoption curve to help plan what we seek to achieve in one specific sales call. So the use of the adoption curve helps us define what I'm going to do in this call versus the next call versus the next call as we seek to manage someone's behavior in relation to how they use a particular product. Sitting alongside that, but traveling in a very different lane, is how we seek to influence that person, that human being. And unlike use of the adoption curve, which means that calls will be quite different at different points in time, as we get to know that particular person better and observe elements of their behavior, so we should become better at adapting our own behavior to best fit with that person's behavior, and that doesn't change so much over time. In fact, for a lot of people, it won't change very much over time. So let's talk about how we become great utilizers of this concept of things like DISC. So in the first instance, what we're talking about is observable behavior and observable language, and recognizing that when we seek to influence the behavior of another person, we need to do that by being at one level credible, and that goes kind of with believable, and finding enough of a connection at a human level that makes all of the things that we say, the content of our call, actually land. And the problem we have is if we don't find that connection, if we don't make that connection correctly, we can say all of the things that seem to have the right content, but we don't actually connect, and therefore we don't see the behavior change. And the reality is, if you think about how many calls you've made sometimes on customers where you feel like you're saying all of the right things, but you're not actually seeing any behavior change, the chances are it might be you're not really speaking that customer's language. You're not connecting with that customer as a person, as a human being. A lot of people say, oh, I naturally do this. A few people do. Most people don't. Most people think that they do it better than they really do it. And the way we go from being not all that good at it to mastery is increase the level of consciousness of our observations of our customers' behavior and the choices then we make about our own behavior. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it all comes down to a simple cycle. And the cycle is, before we make a call, we think about not just what we're going to say in that call, which is the adoption curve part, see the other video, but who is this customer? How am I going to adapt my behavior in this call to best influence that customer? So I make a plan for that before I walk in, and I really try and get in that headspace. I go and I execute the call, and I seek to deliver the call in the way that I'd planned it. And then afterwards I come out and say, did I do what I said I was going to do? And that's not just did I say the things I was going to say. That's kind of the easy part. The bigger reflection is, did I adapt appropriately to that customer's behavior style, and did I hold that for the period of the call? Because what often happens is you start with a higher level of adaptation, but as the call progresses, you actually slide back into being kind of like your more typical self. And that doesn't work. As you slide back, So the level of connection starts to fall away, and the chances of actually achieving behavioural change also falls away. Okay, you've heard me say a few times I'll talk about observable behaviour. I'm actually not a great fan of thinking you need to be experts on knowing what is D behaviour and I behaviour and S behaviour and C behaviour. I'm not a great fan of that. In fact, from my perspective, you can forget about the 4 quadrants. Surprised? Well, you don't need to be. The 4 quadrants are essentially made up of 2 sets of behaviour which form, in the DISC model, the 2 scales, the horizontal and the vertical. Because DISC is used for different purposes, sometimes it's helping people work in teams and various other sorts of things, there are a number of different approaches to how the 2 scales work. In today's video, I'm really focusing in on how I believe as a salesperson you should view the DISC model. And that might be a little bit different to some of the other versions that you might hear about. So let's break it down. Let's keep it simple. I'm going to ask you to think about the horizontal scale as being introverted behaviour to extroverted behaviour. Introverted to extroverted. So introverted behaviour, as you know, introverts tend to be less physically mobile in their behaviour patterns, so they're more constrained. Extroverts tend to be more blah, 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 blah. And introverts tend to speak often slower and often quieter. And extroverts will often speak louder and often a lot more tone in their voice and a lot more, just a lot more power, and they're just more out there. If everything I've just described is very easily observable, you don't have to be a psychologist to work it out. And if you're probably about 15 or 30 seconds with anyone, you'll get a sense of where they sit on that scale. The goal is not necessarily to mimic them, but to move in that direction. So if you're more extroverted and you're sitting with someone who you can see has a more introverted style, you need to come down. And if you're a little bit more introverted and you're sitting with someone who's really quite out there or quite strong in how they speak, you need to step up and be more like them. You're not trying to outdo them, you're just trying to move more like them. Again, this is relatively easy because it's so obviously observable. You don't need to be an expert. The second scale, usually represented as the vertical scale, gets more to language. And so what we recognize is that a lot of people are more drawn to language around fact, and they make decisions based around facts. And others are drawn more to language and make decisions more around emotion. So just listening to someone respond to simple things, a simple question, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? Oh, I had a game of golf. How was that? Someone might say, oh, I had a good round. Got around in 3 hours, was right on my handicap, or was 2 above my handicap, and it was good. What you heard is facts, not a lot of emotion. Someone else, oh, it was great. I got to catch up with some good friends and it was a gorgeous day out there and went out. Oh, the golf wasn't so fantastic, but it was just such a nice way to spend a few hours, blah, blah, blah. It was all about emotion. Simple questions, particularly open-ended questions that may or may not relate to work, will often tell us so much about someone's preferred style on that scale. So just listening and adapting. So the way we talk about our products, we're using either more facts or we're emphasizing the emotion around those. Clinical facts about a lens, clinical facts, business facts around the profitability, versus more about this is how wearers will feel. This is how you will feel when you see this with your customers. This is what they're likely to say to you. This is how they're feeling. This is how that's going to make you feel. This is how your staff will feel. Those sorts of things. When you're using emotion-based language to someone who exists more in a fact world, they'll see the conversation as being light. When you're saying fact-based world to someone who exists more in the world of emotions, they'll see the conversation as being clinical. Your opportunity is simply to listen to that and then make decisions about how you balance the emphasis in how you talk about your products. It gets down to how people practice the whole field of optometry. People who are more fact-based tend to be drawn to the science, and because they learn the science, they get to use it in the land of optometry, and that means working with people. Others are drawn more to the desire to help people, and they learn the science in order to be able to do that. See the difference? As you get to know each and every one of your customers, and it's not just the ECPs, but it's also people who work in the optical retail space, you should become quite good at seeing where they sit on that scale. And recording in your SFDC, or however you choose to record, those observations about those two scales and reminding yourself of those before you make a call will make a tremendous difference to your ability to engage with a customer during the course of a call, and to make sure that what you talk about in the call is heard, is believable, and is meaningful to your customer, and therefore likely to influence their behaviour. The use of this stuff is incredibly powerful. From my perspective, every great salespeople produce great results. Every great salesperson I've ever worked with becomes a master at this, and they work at it every call. They record it every call. They think about the language they're going to use and the behaviour they're going to exhibit for every call. And that's what I want you to do. When you do it well, you will see the difference. Good luck.